Hi, I'm Maya Chen, and I'm 32 years old. I've been married to James Harrison for 3 years, and I wish I could say it's been the perfect fairy tale everyone expected. But honestly, it's been anything but smooth sailing. The biggest storm in our marriage has nothing to do with James himself. It's his mother, Victoria, who's made it her mission to remind me that I don't belong in their exclusive family circle. Let me take you back to how this all started. I met James at a tech conference in Seattle where I was presenting a panel on sustainable business practices. He was charming, witty, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone who, as I would later discover, came from old money. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We connected over our shared passion for environmental conservation and our love of obscure indie films that no one else seemed to appreciate. James never flaunted his wealth. He drove a modest hybrid car and lived in a comfortable, but not extravagant, apartment. He wore the same navy blue jacket to most of our early dates, and we often spent evenings walking along the waterfront rather than dining at expensive restaurants. I fell in love with his humble spirit, his genuine laugh, and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about marine conservation. 6 months into our relationship, James invited me to his cousin's wedding. "It's time you met the family," he said, squeezing my hand with a mixture of excitement and, was that anxiety? I should have paid more attention to that subtle warning sign. The wedding was held at Sapphire Cove Resort, a breathtaking property on a private island off the coast of Maine. As our boat approached the island, I gasped at the sight. Pristine. Beaches, lush gardens, and an elegant colonial-style building perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. "Your family knows the owners?" I asked innocently. James gave me a hesitant smile. "Actually, my grandfather built it. It's been in the family for generations." That was the moment I realized James wasn't just well off. He was part of the Harrison family, owners of one of the largest luxury hotel chains on the East Coast. The same family whose business practices I had actually criticized in my graduate thesis on sustainable tourism. I still remember stepping onto that island, feeling like I had wandered into a different world. Everyone was dressed in designer outfits that probably cost more than my annual salary at the nonprofit where I worked. Women with perfectly highlighted hair clutched crystal champagne flutes while discussing their summer homes and charity galas. And then I met Victoria Harrison, James's mother. She stood at the center of it all, a commanding presence in a tailored cream suit that made her look like she had stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in an immaculate chignon, and a string of pearls, family heirlooms, I would later learn, adorned her neck. "So you're the environmental consultant," she said, looking me up and down with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to appraising the value of things and people. Her smile never reached her eyes as she took in my simple blue dress that I had splurged on for the occasion. "Sustainability director, actually," I corrected gently, extending my hand. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Harrison." She barely touched my fingers before withdrawing her hand. "James mentioned you work for some sort of activist organization?" "The Pacific Northwest Conservation Alliance," I nodded. "We partner with businesses to implement sustainable practices while maintaining profitability." "How interesting," she murmured, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. James has always had a bleeding heart for these causes. I suppose we can blame his college years for that phase. James tensed beside me. "It's not a phase, Mother. Maya's organization has helped transform dozens of companies." Victoria's eyebrow arched slightly. "Well, we must all have our hobbies, mustn't we?" She turned to greet another guest before I could respond, effectively dismissing me from her presence. That weekend set the tone for what would become a 3-year struggle for acceptance. James assured me his mother would warm up eventually, that she was just protective of the family legacy and worried about outsiders who might not understand their responsibilities to the Harrison name. She treated my college girlfriend the same. Way, he confided. Once she sees how amazing you are, she'll come around. But she didn't come around. Not when James proposed 6 months later with his grandmother's emerald ring, which Victoria suggested might be too precious for everyday wear when she saw it on my finger. Not when we moved into our Seattle home, which she called, charmingly, modest, with thinly veiled disapproval. And certainly not at our wedding, where she managed to smile for photographs while whispering to relatives that perhaps this was just James's rebellious period finally manifesting. I tried everything to win her approval. I learned about wine to discuss her prized collection. I read up on the history of New England's oldest families. I even volunteered for the hospital board she chaired, spending countless hours organizing their annual fundraiser only to have her take credit for my ideas. Nothing worked. To Victoria, I would always be the outsider, the girl from a middle-class California family who worked at a little environmental group and didn't understand the responsibility that came with the Harrison name. For 3 years, I swallowed my pride during family gatherings. I smiled through her backhanded compliments and pretended not to notice when she seated me far away from James at dinner parties. I convinced myself that if I just tried harder, if I was just patient enough, one day I would be truly accepted. But everything changed last month when the annual Harrison family vacation to Sapphire Cove Resort came around. This tradition, 2 weeks of summer spent at their beloved family property, was apparently sacred. For generations, Harrisons had gathered there to sail, play tennis, and strategize about the family business over lobster dinners and expensive cognac. This year would be my first Harrison vacation as James's wife. I had already taken time off work and bought new swimsuits for the occasion. James and I had even planned to use the opportunity to announce some exciting news to the family. Then, 3 weeks before the trip, James came home looking uncomfortable, his phone clutched in his hand. "So, about the vacation," he started, not meeting my eyes. I immediately sensed something was wrong. "What about it?" "Mother thinks it would be best if you didn't come this year." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me?" James ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize. "She says this trip is really about family business planning. There will be a lot of meetings, strategy sessions about the hotel chain's future. She thinks you might be uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable? I'm your wife, James. That makes me family." I know, he sighed. "But there's going to be discussion about expanding some properties in environmentally sensitive areas, and Mother thinks your professional background might make things tense." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So I'm excluded because I might have an opinion about your family potentially damaging protected ecosystems?" "It's not like that," James protested weakly. "It's just this once. Next year will be different, I promise." But I knew it wouldn't be. This was just Victoria's latest tactic to remind me that I wasn't really a Harrison, that I would never truly belong in their world of privilege and power. And what hurt most was that James, once again, wasn't standing up to her. As I stood there in our living room, watching my husband fumble for excuses, something inside me finally snapped. 3 years of trying to be accepted, of dimming my light to fit into their world. And for what? To be told I wasn't welcome on a family vacation? What James didn't know, what none of the Harrisons knew, was that I wasn't just the idealistic environmentalist they dismissed me as. And the news we had been planning to share at Sapphire Cove wasn't just any announcement. Little did Victoria Harrison realize that her exclusive family paradise was about to change hands. And I had everything to do with it. What Victoria Harrison didn't know about me, what the entire Harrison family failed to understand, was that I wasn't just some naive environmentalist who happened to catch James's eye. Before I dedicated my career to sustainability, I had built and sold 2 tech startups in Silicon Valley. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The little environmental group Victoria dismissed was actually my third successful venture, now partnering with Fortune 500 companies on large-scale sustainability transformations. But I never flaunted my success or my finances. My parents had raised me to believe that character mattered more than credit scores, and genuine connections outweighed connections to power. When I met James, I was drawn to his seemingly similar values, his passion for marine conservation, his discomfort with excessive wealth, his desire to make a meaningful impact beyond his family name. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he told me on our third date, as we shared street tacos on a bench overlooking Elliott Bay. "Everyone in my world is obsessed with appearances and status. You actually care about making a difference." Believed him. I believed in us. Even after discovering his family background, I convinced myself that James and I could bridge our different worlds, that we could build something authentic in a landscape of pretense. The proposal came during a camping trip to Olympic National Park. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate setup, just the two of us beneath towering cedars, stars peeking through the canopy. When James pulled out his grandmother's emerald ring, tears in his eyes, I felt certain we were forging our own path. "I don't care what anyone thinks," he promised as he slipped the ring onto my finger. "You're the one I want to build a life with. Everything else is just noise." The noise, however, became deafening once we announced our engagement. Victoria immediately took control of the wedding planning, dismissing my suggestions for a small, sustainable ceremony in favor of an extravagant affair at, where else? Sapphire Cove Resort. "The Harrisons have been married there for 4 generations, she informed me coolly when I suggested an alternative venue. "We don't break tradition." I compromised, agreeing to the location but insisting on sustainable elements. Locally sourced food, digital invitations, charitable donations instead of favors. Victoria countered each request with icy efficiency. The Harrison name means something. In New England society, she reminded me regularly. We have standards to maintain. James tried to mediate, but increasingly found himself caught between his mother's expectations and my principles. More often than not, Victoria won these battles, not because her arguments were stronger, but because James had spent a lifetime seeking her approval. "Just go along with it for now," he'd whisper when we were alone. "Once we're married, things will be different." But they weren't different. After the wedding, Victoria's criticisms became more direct, more frequent. During holiday gatherings, at the Harrison estate in Connecticut, she would make pointed remarks about my career choices. "All this talk about saving the planet," she commented during Thanksgiving dinner last year, swirling her wine. Meanwhile, the Harrison hotels have provided jobs and stability for thousands of families for generations. Real impact requires real investment, not just idealistic rhetoric. I bit my tongue, though I could have mentioned that my organization had created green jobs for hundreds of people while reducing carbon footprints for dozens of companies. What would be the point? In Victoria's world, nothing I accomplished would ever measure up to the illustrious Harrison legacy. James and I argued about it on the drive home. "Why don't you ever defend me?" I demanded, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds," he insisted. "That's just Mother's way. She's protective of our family traditions." "Traditions like making your wife feel worthless?" James sighed. "You're overreacting. Just give her time." Time. I'd given Victoria 3 years of my life, 3 years of swallowing insults and enduring exclusion, and now being banned from the family vacation was the final straw. After James broke the news about the vacation and left for work, I sat in our home office staring at my laptop. On the screen was an email I'd received 2 weeks earlier, an email I hadn't yet shared with James. It was from Marcos Delgado, the CEO of Sustainable Futures Investment Group. I had met Marcos at a climate change conference in Vancouver the previous month, where we discovered a shared vision for transforming the hospitality industry through eco-friendly practices. His firm had been looking to acquire a signature property to showcase their approach to luxury sustainable tourism. "We need a flagship resort," Marcos had explained over coffee. "Somewhere with natural beauty and historical significance, but in need of environmental modernization. If you hear of anything fitting that description, I'd appreciate an introduction." I hadn't been thinking of Sapphire Cove then, but now, as I reread his email requesting a call to discuss potential properties, something clicked into place. The Harrison family didn't know it, but their beloved resort was struggling financially. James had mentioned it in passing: declining bookings, outdated facilities, rising maintenance costs. Victoria and the board of directors had been resistant to necessary renovations, especially eco-friendly updates that James had proposed. "Mother says guests come to Sapphire Cove for tradition, not trends," James had explained defeatedly after yet another rejected proposal. What if there was a way to save the resort while transforming it into something better? What if I could prove to the Harrisons, to Victoria, that my idealistic rhetoric could translate into meaningful action? I picked up my phone and called Marcos. "Maya, good to hear from you," his warm voice greeted me. "Have you found our perfect property?" "I might have," I replied, a plan forming in my mind. "Are you familiar with Sapphire Cove Resort in Maine?" What happened next unfolded with startling speed. Marcos's team conducted a discreet assessment of the property and confirmed what I suspected. The resort was significantly undervalued and ripe for transformation. The current management company, a subsidiary of Harrison Hotels that operated the property, was hemorrhaging money trying to maintain its outdated luxury model. Sustainable Futures made an offer to acquire management rights through a separate holding company. To avoid raising suspicions, Marcos suggested bringing me on as a silent partner and sustainability consultant. I would contribute a portion of my savings from previous business exits in exchange for equity and a seat on the new management board. Agreed immediately with one condition: my involvement would remain confidential until after the deal was finalized. All of this occurred during the 3 weeks leading up to the Harrison family vacation, the same vacation from which I had been expressly excluded. The papers were signed 2 days before James packed his bags for Sapphire Cove, still believing I had accepted my exclusion with reluctant grace. "I'll make it up to you," he promised, kissing me goodbye. "We'll take our own trip somewhere special." I smiled and waved him off, knowing that in just 5 days, I would be making a very different kind of trip to Sapphire Cove Resort. And this time, no one would be able to exclude me. The day after James left for Sapphire Cove, I received a text from my sister-in-law, Olivia. Unlike the rest of the Harrisons, Olivia had always been kind to me. As the youngest sibling and the only daughter, she had her own complicated relationship with Victoria's expectations. "I can't believe Mother excluded you," her message read. "James should have stood up to her. This isn't right." I appreciated her support, but chose not to share my plans. The fewer people who knew, the better. That evening, Victoria called me, something she had never done before. Seeing her name on my phone screen made my stomach clench, but I answered with forced pleasantness. "Hello, Victoria." "Maya." Her voice was crisp, controlled. "I wanted to check that you're doing well." The pretense of concern was so transparent I almost laughed. "I'm fine, thank you." "Good. I'm sure James mentioned our family discussions this week are rather sensitive in nature. Given your professional background, we thought it best to avoid any potential conflicts." I gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly do you think I would do, Victoria? Stage an environmental protest in the middle of your lobster dinner?" Her slight intake of breath told me I'd hit a nerve. "There's no need to be dramatic. The Harrison legacy requires certain difficult decisions that outsiders might not fully comprehend." There it was again. Outsider. Despite being James's wife, I would always be on the outside looking in. What legacy would that be exactly? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. The legacy of exclusion, or the legacy of running a once prestigious resort into the ground because you refuse to modernize? Silence stretched between us. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice had dropped 10 degrees. I see James was right about your passionate opinions. This is precisely why these discussions are best kept within the family. I'm sure you understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I replied. I understand that you've never considered me family, and you never will. That's not entirely true, Maya, Victoria said, her tone shifting to something almost conciliatory. You're James's choice, and we respect that. But the Harrison business interests have sustained our family for generations. Some matters require a historical perspective that you simply don't possess. I wanted to tell her then. I wanted to reveal that I knew more about her precious resort's finances than she might realize, that her historical perspective was driving Sapphire Cove to ruin. But I held my tongue. The revelation would be so much sweeter in person. Is there anything else you needed, Victoria? I asked instead. No, she replied, the frost returning to her voice. Enjoy your week, Maya. Perhaps use the time to focus on your own work. James will be quite busy with family obligations. After she hung up, I sat seething in our living room. 3 years of subtle put-downs and exclusion had culminated in this, being explicitly told I wasn't family, that I couldn't possibly understand their legacy because I lacked the proper pedigree. What Victoria failed to understand was that legacies aren't just inherited. They can be built. And sometimes, they can be purchased. The next day, I received an email from Marcos with the final acquisition documents. Sustainable Futures had successfully purchased the management rights to Sapphire Cove Resort from the struggling Harrison Hotel subsidiary. The deal included a 10-year operating agreement with options for renewal. While the Harrison family still technically owned the property, they had essentially signed away control of their beloved resort to our management company. The transfer would be officially announced to resort staff the following day and to the Harrison family during their stay. As planned, my name was nowhere in the public documents. On paper, I was simply listed as environmental compliance consultant through my firm. My financial stake and board position were documented in private agreements known only to Marcos and his executive team. That night, I booked a flight to Portland, Maine, and reserved a rental car to drive to the coastal town nearest Sapphire Cove. I packed my most professional outfits, nothing flashy, but elegant enough to command respect. I included the emerald necklace James had given me for our anniversary, a piece that had once belonged to his grandmother, and that Victoria had reluctantly relinquished from the family collection. As I zipped my suitcase closed, my phone chimed, with a text from James. Miss you. Family meetings all day. Mothers in rare form, talking about preserving the Harrison legacy and maintaining standards of excellence. Wish you were here. I smiled to myself as I typed my reply. Don't worry, I'll be there soon enough. He responded immediately. Really? That would be amazing. But Mother would... I cut him off. Trust me, it's all going to work out. 3 days later, I stood at the private dock of Sapphire Cove, waiting for the resort's boat to ferry me across the narrow channel to the island. The morning sun glinted off the water, and a crisp ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. In the distance, I could see the white colonial building perched on its bluff, American flag fluttering from its pole. Marcos had arrived the previous day to announce the management change to the staff. According to his brief update, the transition had gone smoothly. Most employees were relieved to hear about planned improvements and the commitment to keeping the resort open year-round, rather than the seasonal operation that had left many without. Steady income, Ms. Chen? A young man in a crisp uniform approached. I'm Tyler, your boat captain for this morning. Mr. Delgado said you'd be arriving. Thank you, Tyler. I smiled, handing him my bag. Beautiful day for a trip to the island. Yes, ma'am. We're excited about the changes coming to the cove. Lots of buzz among the staff. As we crossed the water, Tyler pointed out features of the property, the private beaches, the nature trails, the historic boathouse that needed restoration. I listened attentively, mentally cataloging the opportunities for sustainable improvements that would enhance rather than detract from the resort's charm. The Harrison family is here for their annual retreat, Tyler mentioned as we approached the dock. They're having some big meeting in the main dining room this morning. Something about the management change, I think. Perfect timing. Marcos was waiting at the dock when we arrived, his expression a mixture of excitement and mischief. Maya, welcome to your new investment. The Harrisons are gathered in the main building. Victoria has been demanding answers about the new management company since yesterday. Has she indeed? I straightened my blazer. And does she know I'm involved? Not yet. His eyes twinkled. The staff has been instructed not to mention your name. The family has been told only that the new sustainability director will be joining. They're meeting to discuss future plans. I took a deep breath, feeling a curious mix of nervousness and vindication. Well then, let's not keep them waiting. We walked up the winding path to the main building, through gardens that had once been immaculate, but now showed signs of neglect. The resort still maintained its classic New England charm, but upon closer inspection, the wear was evident. Faded. Paint, weathered shutters, outdated fixtures. As we entered the grand lobby with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in an ornate mirror. I didn't look like an outsider anymore. I looked like someone who belonged, someone with purpose and power. They're in there. Marcos nodded toward a set of mahogany doors. Through them, I could hear Victoria's voice, sharp with indignation. This is outrageous. Some foreign investment group taking over our family's historic property? I want to speak to whoever's in charge immediately. Marcos gave me a questioning look, silently asking if I was ready. I nodded, squaring my shoulders and lifting my chin. It was time for Victoria Harrison to meet the new management. I paused outside the mahogany doors, my heart pounding against my ribs. Through the polished wood, Victoria's voice carried clearly, her tone growing increasingly imperious. I simply cannot believe the board approved this transaction without consulting the family first. We've operated Sapphire Cove for 4 generations. A male voice, probably James's father, Richard, responded with uncharacteristic hesitation. Victoria, you know the resort has been losing money for years. The subsidiary's directors had a fiduciary responsibility to— Fiduciary responsibility? Victoria's voice rose an octave. This isn't about spreadsheets, Richard. This is about legacy, about tradition, about keeping control of what rightfully belongs to the Harrisons. Marcos gave me a reassuring nod, then pushed open the double doors. The conversation inside abruptly ceased as we entered. The Harrisons were seated around a massive oak table, Victoria at the head, with Richard to her right and James to her left. James's brother Edward and sister Olivia occupied seats along the sides, along with several cousins and board members I recognized from our wedding. Their expressions ranged from surprise to confusion to, in Victoria's case, barely contained fury. James's eyes widened when he saw me, his mouth forming a silent question. "Good morning," Marcos said pleasantly. "I'm Marcos Delgado, CEO of Sustainable Futures Investment Group. Thank you for allowing us to join your family meeting." Victoria rose from her chair, her pearl necklace gleaming against her navy silk blouse. "We were not informed that you would be bringing— guests?" Her gaze slid dismissively over me before returning to Marcos. "This is hardly a guest," Marcos replied smoothly. "Allow me to introduce Maya Chen, our environmental compliance consultant and a key advisor on the Sapphire Cove acquisition." A murmur ran through the room. James half stood, looking bewildered. "Maya? What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Victoria cut in. This is completely inappropriate. My daughter-in-law has no business being involved in confidential business discussions. I stepped forward, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. Actually, Victoria, as a principal consultant on this project, I have every right to be here. Principal consultant? She repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. On what grounds would your environmental group qualify you to consult on luxury hospitality management? I smiled, removing a folder from my portfolio. My qualifications include an MBA from Stanford, successful exits from 2 technology startups, and 5 years leading sustainability transformations for Fortune 500 companies. But more importantly, I paused, savoring the moment. I have intimate knowledge of what makes Sapphire Cove special to its guests, and what could make it even better. Victoria's face flushed crimson. This is absurd. You've been to the resort precisely twice. You know nothing about its history or its significance. On the contrary, I countered, opening the folder and sliding documents across the table. I've compiled extensive research on the property's historical significance, its architectural heritage, and its potential for environmentally sustainable luxury positioning. In fact, our market analysis suggests that by embracing its historical charm while updating its environmental practices, Sapphire Cove could increase bookings by 40% within 2 years. James was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're part of the company that bought the management rights? Before I could respond, Victoria slammed her hand on the table. This is clearly a conflict of interest. She's using her connection to our family to infiltrate our business. Marcos cleared his throat. Mrs. Harrison, if I may, Maya's involvement was based purely on her professional qualifications and her vision for transforming Sapphire Cove into an industry leader in sustainable luxury hospitality. The fact that she happens to be married to your son is coincidental. That was stretching the truth, but I maintained a neutral expression. Coincidental? Victoria scoffed. This is obviously revenge for being excluded from our family gathering. I felt a flash of anger, but kept my voice steady. This is business, Victoria. The resort is struggling financially, and we have a plan to revitalize it while preserving its heritage. Whether you choose to see that as revenge or as an opportunity is entirely up to you. Richard Harrison leaned forward, suddenly interested. What kind of revitalization are we talking about here? Marcos nodded to me, and I began outlining our vision. Solar panels discreetly integrated into the historic architecture, gray water recycling systems, farm-to-table dining featuring Maine's coastal bounty, partnerships with local artisans, and conservation groups. Throughout my presentation, I could feel Victoria's glare burning into me, but I didn't falter. The Harrison name would remain prominently associated with the property, I concluded. In fact, we'd like to establish a historical exhibit celebrating your family's role in developing Sapphire Cove and the surrounding community. Several board members were nodding appreciatively. Even Edward looked impressed. But Victoria wasn't having it. This is nothing but a hostile takeover dressed up in environmentalist rhetoric, she spat. You've deliberately deceived this family. The deal is already finalized, Mother, Olivia interrupted, examining the documents I'd distributed. And honestly, these plans look remarkable. It's exactly the kind of modernization I've been advocating for years. Victoria turned on her daughter. You knew about this? No, Olivia replied calmly. But I've been telling you that we needed to embrace sustainability and modernization or risk losing everything. Maya and her team are offering a way to preserve the legacy while moving forward. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to speak with my son, alone. She fixed James with a look that brooked no argument. James hesitated, glancing between his mother and me. I gave him a small nod. This confrontation had been inevitable. 5 minutes, he told her, following Victoria out onto the veranda that overlooked the Atlantic. Through the glass doors, I could see Victoria gesticulating forcefully, her face contorted with emotion. James stood with his back partly to me, his posture stiff and defensive. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language spoke volumes. Marcos leaned closer. "Are you okay?" "I will be," I murmured. "One way or another." The remaining Harrisons were examining our proposal with varying degrees of interest. Richard peppered Marcos with financial questions, while Olivia enthusiastically discussed the sustainable design elements with me. Only Edward seemed conflicted, his loyalty to his mother warring with his business acumen. "The projected returns are impressive," he admitted reluctantly. "But Mother will never accept this." "She doesn't have to accept it," I replied quietly. "The agreement is binding. The question now is whether she'll choose to work with us or against us." The veranda doors flew open as Victoria stormed back into the room, James following with a troubled expression. "This meeting is over," Victoria announced. "The Harrison family needs to discuss this situation privately." Marcos began gathering his materials. "Of course. We understand this is a lot to process. We'll be staying at the resort for the remainder of the week if you have any questions." Victoria's lips thinned to a bloodless line. "You most certainly will not. This is a private family gathering. I must insist that you leave immediately." I stood my ground. "Actually, Victoria, as representatives of the management company, we have every right to be here. In fact, we've reserved the Ocean View suite for the week." "The Ocean View suite is reserved for Harrison family members only," she hissed. "Not anymore," I replied evenly. "The reservation policy has been updated as of this morning." The room fell silent. Victoria looked as though she might explode, her carefully maintained composure crumbling before our eyes. "James," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "are you going to allow your wife to disrespect our family traditions like this? To use her business connections? To hijack our ancestral property?" All eyes turned to James. In that moment, I realized that despite all my careful planning, I had no idea what he would do. Would he finally stand up to his mother, or would he once again choose the path of least resistance? James looked between us, trapped between the woman who had raised him and the woman he had married, the woman who represented his past and the one who represented his future. "I think," he said slowly, "that we should listen to what Maya has to say." Victoria's gasp was audible. "You can't be serious." "I am," James continued, his voice growing stronger. "Maya has accomplished more on her own than most of us have with all our family connections. If she believes in this vision for Sapphire Cove, then I think we should at least hear her out." I felt a rush of vindication, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Victoria Harrison wasn't someone who surrendered easily, especially not to an outsider who had challenged her authority. As if reading my thoughts, Victoria straightened her shoulders and fixed me with an icy stare. "This isn't over, Maya. Not by a long shot." I met her gaze without flinching. "I wouldn't expect it to be." The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time since becoming a Harrison, I wasn't the one at a disadvantage. After the explosive meeting, James and I retreated to the Ocean View suite. The room was just as grand as I remembered from our brief stays, a sweeping panorama of the Atlantic through floor-to-ceiling windows, antique furniture that whispered of old money, and a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. "Were you ever going to tell me?" James asked quietly, standing by the windows with his back to me. I sank into an armchair, suddenly exhausted. "I was planning to surprise you once the deal was finalized. I didn't expect everything to unfold like this." He turned, his expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. "You bought the management rights to my family's resort without telling me. How did you think I would react?" "Technically, Sustainable Futures bought the management rights. I'm just a partner and consultant." "Don't split hairs, Maya. You know what I mean. He ran a hand through his hair. That familiar gesture of frustration. This is the resort where I spent every summer growing up, where my parents got married, where my grandfather taught me to sail. It's not just a business asset. I leaned forward. I know that, James. That's exactly why I got involved, to preserve what makes Sapphire Cove special while helping it evolve. The resort was struggling financially. If something didn't change, you might have lost it entirely. We were handling it. Were you? Because from what I could see, your mother was burying her head in the sand while the property deteriorated and bookings declined. I softened my tone. I didn't do this to hurt your family. I did it to save something you love. James sank onto the window seat, his shoulders slumping. You could have told me. Would you have supported me, or would you have warned your mother? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said quietly. For 3 years, I've tried to be accepted by your family, by Victoria. I've swallowed her insults, endured her exclusion, and watched you fail to stand up for me time and again. When she banned me from this vacation, something finally broke. I realized I'd never win her approval, so I stopped trying. James looked stricken. I never meant to let her hurt you. But you did, James. Every time you chose her comfort over my dignity. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. I'm not doing this out of revenge. I genuinely believe we can transform Sapphire Cove into something better, something that honors its history while securing its future. He squeezed my hand, a glimmer of the man I fell in love with showing through. The solar integration ideas are actually brilliant. I've been suggesting similar concepts for years, but Mother always shut them down. I know. I remembered your sketches. I hesitated. James, I need to know where you stand. Are you with me on this, or are you going to side with Victoria? Before he could answer, a sharp knock interrupted us. James opened the door to find Olivia, her expression urgent. Mother's called an emergency family meeting. She's bringing in the family lawyers to challenge the management agreement. My stomach dropped. On what grounds? She's claiming the board acted without proper authority and that there was insider information involved because of your connection to the family. Olivia glanced at James. She's also suggesting that you breached your fiduciary duty by not disclosing your wife's involvement. James paled. That's ridiculous. I had no idea Maya was involved. I stood up. This is exactly why I didn't tell you, James. I knew Victoria would try to twist this into something underhanded. Olivia nodded sympathetically. Maya, I think you should know, Mother's also suggesting that you only married James to gain access to the family business. The accusation felt like a slap. That's absurd. I didn't even know about the resort until after we were engaged. No, Olivia said gently. But Mother's desperate and angry. She's using every weapon she can find. James paced the room. This is getting out of hand. I need to talk to her. No, I said firmly. We need to face this together. The agreement is legally sound. Marcos made sure of that. Victoria can't undo it with baseless accusations. Olivia checked her watch. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. Father asked me to give you a heads up. She squeezed my arm. For what it's worth, I think your plans for the resort are inspired. It's exactly what this place needs. After she left, James and I stood in awkward silence. Finally, he spoke. I'll talk to Mother. Make her see reason. I shook my head. You've been trying to make her see reason for 3 years, James. It hasn't worked yet. This is different. Is it? I challenged. Or is this just another situation where you'll start off defending me, then gradually give in to Victoria's demands to keep the peace? His face hardened. That's not fair. Isn't it? Name one time you've truly stood up to her when it mattered. James fell silent again. And in that silence, I felt the weight of our shared history. All the times he had chosen the path of least resistance. All the times I had swallowed my hurt to make things easier for him. "I'm going to the meeting," I said finally. "With or without you. I won't let Victoria bully me out of this opportunity, and I won't let her destroy what could be an amazing future for Sapphire Cove." I left him standing in the suite and made my way to Marcos's room down the hall. I needed to prepare for the legal challenge Victoria was mounting. As I walked the elegant corridor with its nautical artwork and brass fixtures, I felt a curious sense of belonging. This resort that had always symbolized my exclusion from the Harrison family might now become the means of my empowerment. Marcos opened his door immediately, already on a call with our legal team. He covered the phone briefly. "Victoria's moving fast. She's called in Reynolds and White, top-tier firm from Boston." "Of course she has," I muttered, taking a seat at his desk. As Marcos continued his call, I scrolled through the acquisition documents on my tablet, reviewing the clauses that protected our position. The agreement was solid. We had been meticulous in our due diligence and transparent in our disclosures. Victoria might be able to cause delays and generate negative publicity, but she couldn't invalidate the deal. A text from James appeared on my phone. "Going to speak with Mother privately before the meeting. Please wait for me." I sighed, typing, "Back. The meeting starts in 15 minutes. Don't let her manipulate you." His response was immediate. "I won't. Trust me." But did I trust him? After 3 years of watching him cave to Victoria's demands, I wasn't sure. And yet, a part of me desperately wanted to believe that this time would be different, that James would finally choose me, choose our future together, over Victoria's manipulation. Marcos ended his call, looking confident. "Our lawyers say we're on solid ground. The board approval was properly obtained, all disclosures were made, and your connection to the Harrison family doesn't constitute a conflict of interest, since you weren't involved in their corporate decision-making." Victoria. "Won't care about legal technicalities," I replied. "This is personal for her. She's lost control of something she considers her birthright, and she's lost it to someone she considers beneath her. Then we'll need to make this business, not personal," Marcos said pragmatically. "Focus on the benefits to the Harrison legacy, the preservation of the resort's historical elements, the financial upside." I nodded, though I doubted Victoria would be swayed by rational arguments. For her, this wasn't about spreadsheets or sustainability. Metrics, it was about power and pride. As we prepared to head to the meeting, a commotion erupted in the hallway. I opened the door to find James and Victoria locked in a heated argument just outside our room. "You're making a terrible mistake," Victoria was saying, her voice tight with fury. "That woman has manipulated you from the beginning. Can't you see what she's doing?" "The only manipulation I see is coming from you, Mother," James replied, his tone firmer than I'd ever heard him use with Victoria. "For 3 years you've tried to push Maya away, and I've let you. Not anymore." Victoria noticed me standing in the doorway, and her expression hardened. There she is now, the architect of our family's humiliation. "Are you proud of yourself, Maya? Using your husband's name to steal what belongs to us?" I stepped into the hallway, Marcos behind me. "I haven't stolen anything, Victoria. I've invested in saving something that your mismanagement was destroying." "Mismanagement?" she sputtered. "How dare you? My family built this resort from nothing. And now it's hemorrhaging money because you refuse to adapt to changing times," I countered. "Your sentimentality is killing the very legacy you claim to cherish." Victoria turned to James, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You need to choose, James, right now, your family or her." The hallway fell silent. Even the distant sounds of the resort seemed to fade away as James stood at the crossroads Victoria had forced upon him. I held my breath, suddenly afraid of what he might say. James looked between us, his mother, imperious and demanding, and me, challenging but vulnerable. In his eyes, I could see the weight of legacy and expectation battling with love and principle. "That's not a choice I should have to make," he said finally. "But if you're forcing me to, Mother, then I choose Maya. I choose our future together." Victoria stepped back as if physically struck. For once, the unflappable matriarch seemed genuinely shocked. "You don't mean that? You're just confused." "I'm not confused," James interrupted. "For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly. Maya isn't trying to destroy our family legacy. She's trying to save it, and I'm going to help her." He moved to stand beside me, taking my hand in his. The simple gesture spoke volumes. We were a united front at last. Victoria's face contorted, with rage and something else, perhaps the first flicker of fear. "This isn't over," she hissed, before turning on her heel and striding toward the conference room. James squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up to her." I squeezed. Back, relief, and pride washing through me. Better late than never. Together, the three of us followed Victoria down the hall, preparing for the confrontation ahead. I had no illusions that James's stand would be enough to change Victoria's mind. If anything, her resistance would only intensify now that her own son had publicly defied her. The battle for Sapphire Cove, and for my place in the Harrison family, was just beginning. The Harrison family conference room was designed to intimidate. Wood-paneled walls displayed oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors and maritime scenes. A massive mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. The entire setup screamed old money and established power. By the time James, Marcos, and I arrived, the room was already filled with Harrison family members and their legal team. 3 impeccably dressed attorneys from Reynolds and White, their leather portfolios arranged precisely before them. Victoria sat at the head of the table, a position she had clearly claimed deliberately. Richard Harrison sat to her right, looking uncomfortable but resolute in his support of his wife. As we entered, Victoria's eyes narrowed at the sight of James and me together. "How kind of you to join us," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I was just explaining to our attorneys how my daughter-in-law orchestrated this hostile takeover." I kept my expression neutral as I took a seat, James beside me and Marcos across the table. "There's nothing hostile about a standard business transaction, Victoria. The board approved the management transfer because it was in the best interest of the resort." One of the attorneys, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Chen Harrison, I'm Arthur Reynolds. We have some serious concerns about the circumstances surrounding this acquisition." "I'm sure you do," I replied. "But I assume you've reviewed the transaction documents. Everything was done by the book." "The letter of the law, perhaps," Reynolds conceded. "But there are ethical considerations. Your connection to the Harrison family creates, at minimum, the appearance of impropriety." Marcos leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Reynolds, the appearance of impropriety is not grounds for invalidating a legitimate business agreement. Mrs. Chen Harrison was not involved in the Harrison Hotel's board decisions and had no inside information beyond what was publicly available to any potential investor." Victoria slapped her hand on the table. "That's absurd. She's married to my son. Of course she had access to insider information." I met her gaze steadily. "What insider information specifically, Victoria? The fact that the resort was struggling financially? That was obvious to anyone who visited. The declining booking numbers? Those are included in the public annual reports. The resistance to modernization? I experienced that firsthand when James presented his sustainability proposals and was shut down repeatedly." James nodded. "Mother, Maya's right. Everything she knew about Sapphire Cove's challenges came from conversations we had as husband and wife, not from confidential board materials." Reynolds exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Mrs. Harrison, for us to challenge this agreement, we need to demonstrate actual impropriety, not just potential conflicts of interest. Victoria wasn't deterred. What about her relationship with Delgado? That can't be coincidental. Marcos explained how we had met at the climate conference and how my expertise in sustainability made me a natural partner for the Sapphire Cove project. Throughout his explanation, I watched Victoria closely. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped an impatient rhythm on the table, and a muscle twitched in her jaw. She wasn't listening. She was calculating her next attack. Even if the transaction was technically legal, Victoria said when Marcos finished, it was morally reprehensible. My daughter-in-law deliberately concealed her involvement from her own husband and used her connection to our family to undermine our ownership. We didn't undermine your ownership, I corrected. The Harrison family still owns the property. We simply purchased the management rights from your hotel subsidiary, a subsidiary that was considering selling those rights anyway due to continuing losses. Richard Harrison spoke up for the first time. That's true, Victoria. The board had already discussed approaching outside management companies. Victoria shot him a venomous look. Not companies connected to family members who hold a grudge. Oh, that grudge? I echoed, feeling my composure slip. Is that what you think this is about? Obviously. Victoria's voice rose. You were angry about being excluded from the family vacation, so you decided to ruin it for everyone. The room fell silent as her accusation hung in the air. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, but forced myself to remain calm. Victoria, I said, quietly. This may be hard for you to believe, but not everything is about you. I became involved with Sustainable Futures because I believe in their mission, and because I saw an opportunity to save a historic property while making it environmentally responsible. Yes, I was hurt by your exclusion. Who wouldn't be? But this transaction would have made business sense regardless of my personal feelings. Victoria's smile was thin and cruel. A lovely speech, but we all know the truth. James intervened, his voice tight with controlled anger. The truth, Mother, is that you've never given Maya a chance. From the moment you met her, you decided she wasn't good enough for the Harrison name. You've excluded her, insulted her, and undermined her at every opportunity. I was protecting our family interests, Victoria snapped. From what? James demanded. From someone who loves your son? From someone who has built successful businesses and wants to contribute her talents to preserving our family legacy? What exactly are you protecting us from? Victoria's gaze swept dismissively over me. From people who don't understand or respect our traditions. From outsiders who want to change everything we stand for. And what do you stand for exactly? I asked, unable to contain myself any longer. Exclusivity? Rigidity? Refusing to adapt until it's too late? The youngest attorney from Victoria's team interjected smoothly. Perhaps we could return to the legal matters at hand. Yes, Victoria agreed, composing herself. The legal matters. Mr. Reynolds, please explain to my daughter-in-law why we will be challenging this agreement in court. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. While the transaction itself may be difficult to overturn, we believe there are grounds for a temporary injunction, based on potential breaches of fiduciary duty and conflicts of interest. This would halt any changes to the resort's operations while the courts review the circumstances of the acquisition. Marcos looked unconcerned. An injunction requires demonstrating immediate and irreparable harm. The proposed changes to Sapphire Cove will enhance its value and preserve its historical significance. Where's the harm? The harm, Victoria declared, is to the Harrison family's control over our ancestral property. The harm is to our traditions and our legacy. I shook my head in disbelief. Your legacy will be a bankrupt resort if you don't allow it to evolve, Victoria. She ignored me, turning instead to James. As a Harrison, you have a responsibility to fight this takeover. Your great-grandfather built this resort. Your grandfather expanded it. Your father and I preserved it through recessions and hurricanes. Will you be the one who lets it slip away? I could feel James tensing beside me. the weight of generations pressing down on his shoulders. This was Victoria's most potent weapon: family obligation, the burden of legacy. I had seen it work on him countless times before. "I'm not letting it slip away," James said slowly. "I'm helping it survive." Victoria's expression hardened. "By siding with her against your own family?" "I'm not siding against my family. I'm trying to save something we all love before it's too late." Victoria stood abruptly. "You've made your choice clear then." She gathered her papers, nodding to her legal team. "We'll proceed with the injunction immediately. In the meantime, I expect you both to leave the island. This is still a private family gathering." "Actually," Marcos interjected, "as representatives of the management company, we have every right to remain on the property. Any attempt to remove us would constitute interference with our contractual rights." Victoria's face flushed with rage. "This is still Harrison property?" "Yes," I agreed, "and we respect that. But the management agreement gives us the right to be here, to assess the property, and to begin planning improvements." For a moment, Victoria looked like she might physically explode with fury. Then, with visible effort, she composed herself into the picture of icy dignity. "Very well, stay if you must. But understand this, I will fight this takeover with everything I have. The Harrisons have weathered far worse threats than you, Maya." She turned to James. "And you need to decide where your true loyalties lie. With the family that raised you, or with a woman who's willing to betray her own husband for revenge." "That's enough, Mother," James said quietly. "You don't know what you're talking about." Victoria gathered her things, her legal team following suit. At the door, she paused for one final barb. "Enjoy playing hotelier while you can, Maya. This little victory of yours will be very short-lived." With that, she swept from the room, her attorneys trailing in her wake like expensive shadows. Several family members followed, though Richard lingered, looking torn. "She's just protecting what she loves," he offered apologetically. "Give her time." After they left, the room felt suddenly larger, the tension dissipating like fog in sunshine. Olivia, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, let out a long breath. "Well, that went about as well as could be expected," she remarked dryly. James slumped in his chair, looking exhausted. "She's not going to give up." "Of course not," I agreed. "But neither am I." Marcos checked his watch. "I need to update our legal team. The injunction request won't succeed, but we should be prepared." As he left, James turned to me, his expression troubled. "Maya, was any of what she said true? Did you do this because of being excluded from the vacation?" The question stung, despite its predictability. That was the catalyst, yes. Being excluded, again, made me realize I needed to stop seeking Victoria's approval and start creating my own path. But I genuinely believe in this project, James. I wouldn't have invested in it otherwise. He nodded slowly. "I believe you. I just wish you had told me." "Would you have supported me?" He hesitated just a fraction too long. "I would have tried." And there it was, the uncertainty that had defined our relationship for 3 years. James wanted to support me, but Victoria's influence ran deep, tangled in his sense of identity and family loyalty. Olivia approached, squeezing my shoulder sympathetically. "For what it's worth, I think you're exactly what this place needs. Mother's just scared of change." "It's more than that," I said. "She's scared of losing control. Of someone like me having power over something she considers hers." "True," Olivia agreed. "But she's also scared because deep down, she knows you're right about the resort needing to evolve." As we left the conference room, I felt a curious mixture of triumph and trepidation. I had faced Victoria directly and held my ground, but her parting threat lingered. This victory, as she called it, might indeed be short-lived. The war for Sapphire Cove, and for my place in the Harrison world, was far from over. By dinner time, news of the confrontation had spread throughout the resort. Staff members cast curious glances our way as James and I entered the main dining room. Victoria had chosen to dine privately in her suite, a small victory, but one that allowed us to breathe more easily. "She's rallying the troops," Olivia murmured, joining us at our table. "Making calls to every Harrison connection with any influence in Maine's business community or legal system." "That was expected," I replied, unfolding my napkin. "Victoria doesn't surrender easily." James looked troubled. "The family's divided. Uncle Robert and Cousin Philip are firmly in Mother's camp, but Father and Edward seem to be wavering. They're businessmen first. They can see the financial logic of the plan." "And the rest?" I asked. "Waiting to see which way the wind blows," Olivia said with a sardonic smile. "Typical Harrison behavior." Our conversation paused as a waiter approached with wine. I recognized him as Michael, who had served us during our wedding reception. His smile seemed genuine as he presented the bottle. "Mrs. Chen Harrison, Mr. Harrison, welcome back to Sapphire Cove. May I say that the staff is quite excited about the sustainability initiatives we've been hearing about?" James looked surprised. "You are?" Michael nodded discreetly. "Many of us have been concerned about the resort's future. The seasonal closures have been difficult for those of us who live locally." After he left, James turned to me. "You know, I've never really considered how Mother's decisions affected the staff." "That's part of the problem," I said gently. "The Harrisons have always seen Sapphire Cove as your family retreat first and a business second. But for people like Michael, it's their livelihood." Our meal was interrupted by a call from Marcos. His expression was grave when I answered. "Victoria's moving faster than we anticipated. She's filed for an emergency injunction and somehow got it on the docket for tomorrow morning at the county courthouse. Our lawyers are preparing, but you should know, she's making this personal." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The filing includes allegations that you manipulated your position as a Harrison family member to gain insider information, and that your investment was motivated by personal animus rather than business interests." James took the phone. "That's ridiculous, Marcos. Maya would never—" "I know," Marcos interrupted. "But the judge assigned to the case is Gregory Whitman. He and your grandfather were apparently close friends." I felt a chill run through me. Victoria wasn't just using legal tactics. She was leveraging the Harrison family's deep connections in the community, connections that went back generations. After dinner, we returned to our suite to find an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a printout of an article scheduled to run in the local paper the next morning. The headline made my stomach drop. "Family Feud. Harrison Heir's Wife in Hostile Takeover of Historic Resort." The article painted me as a vengeful outsider, using my husband's name to seize control of a beloved local landmark. It quoted sources close to the family, describing my pattern of disrespect for Harrison traditions and my environmentalist agenda that threatened the resort's historic character. "She leaked this to the press," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "She's trying to turn the community against us before we even begin." James read through the article, his face darkening. "This is character assassination. She's making you sound like some kind of gold-digging environmental extremist." "It gets worse," Olivia said, scrolling through her phone. She'd joined us after receiving her own copy of the article. "She's mobilizing the local Historical Preservation Society to oppose any renovations to the property. And she's reached out to competitors of your environmental organization, suggesting they might want to investigate your conflict of interest." I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. In just a few hours, Victoria had launched a multi-pronged attack against not just the management agreement, but my personal and professional reputation. "She's always been ruthless in business," James said quietly. "But I've never seen her go after someone like this. Because no one has ever challenged Her control before, Olivia observed, especially not someone she already considered an outsider. I stared out at the darkening ocean, watching whitecaps form as the wind picked up. A storm was coming, both literally and figuratively. "We need to respond," I said finally. "We can't let her control the narrative." James nodded. "I'll make some calls. There are journalists I know who might be willing to hear our side." "And I can talk to the staff," Olivia offered. "Many of them have been here for decades. Their support could be powerful." As they began making calls, I stepped onto the balcony, needing a moment alone. The cool Atlantic breeze helped clear my head, but it couldn't ease the knot of anxiety in my chest. I had expected resistance from Victoria, but the speed and viciousness of her counterattack had caught me off guard. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Maya Chen?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar but authoritative. "Yes, this is Maya. This is Patricia Winters from the Maine Business Journal. I'm working on a story about the Sapphire Cove acquisition and some concerning allegations that have come to light. Would you care to comment?" My throat tightened. "What allegations exactly?" "We've received information suggesting you used confidential family knowledge to orchestrate a takeover of the Harrison family's historic property. There are also questions about potential ethical violations in your environmental consulting work." Victoria had been busy indeed. "Those allegations are completely false," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "The acquisition was a standard business transaction approved by the resort's management company board. As for my consulting work, it adheres to the highest ethical standards and is entirely separate from my personal relationships." "I see." Her tone was noncommittal. "And how do you respond to Victoria Harrison's statement that you pursued this acquisition as revenge for being excluded from family activities?" The directness of the question took me aback. That's absurd. This was a business decision based on the resort's potential and sustainable future's mission to transform luxury properties into environmental leaders. Mrs. Harrison's opposition stems from resistance to change, not legitimate business concerns. After a few more pointed questions, the call ended. I had no illusions about how the story would be framed. Victoria had gotten to the press first, establishing her narrative before we could present ours. When I returned inside, James was ending his own call, looking frustrated. "Any luck?" I asked. He shook his head. "3 journalists I've known for years suddenly don't have time to discuss this story. Mother's influence runs deep." Olivia returned shortly after, her news equally discouraging. "The staff is split. Longtime employees are hesitant to go against Victoria, even though many like your ideas for the resort. They're afraid of retribution if she wins this battle." Marcos called again with updates from our legal team. The injunction hearing was set for 9 a.m., and Victoria's lawyers had submitted a thick briefing package to the judge, including affidavits from several Harrison family members questioning my character and motives. "We're preparing counter-arguments," Marcos assured us. "The legal case against the agreement is weak. But I won't lie. Victoria's making this as personal and public as possible." After the call, James paced the room. "I need to talk to her. Make her understand that this scorched earth approach hurts everyone, including the resort she claims to love." "She won't listen," I said wearily. "Not to me, not to you. She's determined to win at any cost." "I have to try. This is getting ugly, and it's only going to get worse." Part of me wanted to stop him, to warn him that Victoria would only manipulate him again. But I recognized the determination in his eyes. This was something he needed to do, for his own peace of mind if nothing else. "I'll go with you," I offered, but James shook his head. "No, she won't speak freely if you're there. I need to talk to her alone, Harrison to Harrison." As James left, for Victoria's suite, I turned to Olivia. "Do you think she'll listen to him?" Olivia's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Mother doesn't listen. She waits for her turn to speak. But James needs to try. He's spent his whole life seeking her approval. It's a hard habit to break. While we waited, I checked my email to find a flood of messages. Colleagues asking about the rumors, business partners inquiring about the situation at Sapphire Cove, even a note from my former professor expressing concern about the allegations against me. Victoria's campaign was spreading beyond the local press. She's thorough, I'll give her that, I muttered, showing Olivia my phone. Mother believes reputation is everything, Olivia replied. She's trying to isolate you professionally as well as personally. An hour passed with no word from James. Then 2. I was about to go looking for him when the suite door finally opened. James entered, his expression unreadable. Well, I asked anxiously. What happened? He sank into an armchair, looking drained. She offered a deal. My heart sank. What kind of deal? If we voluntarily withdraw from the management agreement, she'll stop the media campaign and the legal challenges. She'll even consider incorporating some of the sustainability elements into future renovations. And what's the catch? I asked, already knowing the answer. James met my eyes directly. You would have no involvement with Sapphire Cove, ever, and… He hesitated. We would need to reconsider our living situation. Mother thinks it would be healthier if we spent more time in Boston, closer to family oversight. The true meaning was clear. Victoria wasn't just trying to push me out of Sapphire Cove, she was trying to separate me from James, to bring him back under family control. And what did you tell her? I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I told her I needed to discuss it with you, James said. His eyes held an apology, but also uncertainty. In that moment, I realized that despite everything, despite the insults and exclusion I had endured, despite James's promise to stand with me, Victoria still held power over him. She had planted seeds of doubt that were already taking root. You're actually considering it, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I'm considering all options, James replied defensively. This fight is getting vicious, Maya. You've seen what she's willing to do. Your reputation, your business connections, she'll target everything you've built. So I should just surrender? Let her win? Again? It's not about winning or losing. It's about finding a solution that doesn't destroy everyone involved. I looked at James, really looked at him, and saw what I had been trying not to see for 3 years. A man who would always seek the path of least resistance when it came to his mother. A man who talked about standing up to Victoria but inevitably compromised when pressure mounted. I need some air, I said, grabbing my coat. I can't have this conversation right now. As I left the suite, I heard Olivia murmur to her brother, You know that's exactly what Mother wants, right? To come between you two? I didn't wait to hear James's response as I headed into the cool night air, the weight of Victoria's latest attack pressing down on me like a physical burden. The crisis was deepening, spreading beyond Sapphire Cove to threaten everything I had worked for, including my marriage. And for the first time since this battle began, I wasn't sure if I could win. I walked along the moonlit shore, the waves crashing against the rocks in rhythm with my turbulent thoughts. The beach was empty this late, giving me the privacy I desperately needed. I found a driftwood log and sat, pulling my knees to my chest as I stared out at the vast darkness of the Atlantic. 3 years of my life spent trying to fit into the Harrison world. 3 years of swallowing Victoria's subtle insults and enduring her exclusions. 3 years of watching James promise to stand up for me, only to fold when confronted with his mother's disapproval. And now this, the ultimate test of our marriage, and James was considering all options. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcos. More bad news. Victoria's contacted our major investors suggesting the acquisition may be tied up in litigation for years. 2 have expressed concerns. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Victoria was systematically dismantling every aspect of the deal, using her connections and influence to create a storm of doubt and controversy. Even if we won the legal battle, the reputational damage could be irreparable. Another message arrived, this one from James. "Please come back. We need to talk." I tucked the phone away, not ready to face him yet. The worst part wasn't Victoria's attacks. I had expected those. It was the realization that despite everything, James still couldn't fully commit to standing with me. His first instinct was still to find a compromise, a way to appease his mother even at my expense. "Thought I might find you here." I turned to see Olivia approaching, hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. She sat beside me on the log, not speaking for several minutes. "He's terrified of losing you," she finally said. "But he's also terrified of losing himself." "What do you mean?" Olivia sighed. "James has been the good son his entire life. Every decision, every achievement has been measured against the Harrison standard. When he fell in love with you, someone who challenged that world, it was both liberating and terrifying for him." I stared at the horizon where black sea met black sky. "I never asked him to choose between me and his family." "No, but Mother did, repeatedly." Olivia picked up a small stone, turning it over in her palm. "That's her specialty, creating false choices, making people feel they have to sacrifice one thing they love for another. And now she's doing it again. The resort or me?" "Exactly." Olivia tossed the stone into the waves. "What will you do?" The question hung between us as I considered my options. I could surrender the deal, preserve my marriage, and give Victoria the victory she craved. I could push forward, potentially winning Sapphire Cove but losing James in the process. Or I could find another way, a path that Victoria hadn't anticipated. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I won't let Victoria determine my worth anymore." Olivia nodded approvingly. "For what it's worth, I think you're the best thing that ever happened to my brother. And to this resort." As we sat in companionable silence, my phone lit up again. Not James this time, but an email notification from an unfamiliar address. The subject line caught my attention. "Information about Victoria Harrison you should know." My finger hovered over the delete button. Likely another part of Victoria's campaign to distract and discredit me. But something made me open it instead. The message was brief. "Mrs. Chen Harrison, I worked as Victoria's personal assistant 15 years ago. There are things about Sapphire Cove's history and your mother-in-law that might help your current situation. If you're interested, meet me at the Harborview Cafe in town tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eleanor Bennett." I showed the email to Olivia, whose eyebrows shot up in recognition. Eleanor Bennett. Mother fired her abruptly years ago. There were rumors at the time, but Mother squashed them quickly. No one ever knew exactly what happened. "Could be a trap," I said cautiously. "Could be," Olivia agreed. But Eleanor was always honest, sometimes painfully so. That's probably why Mother fired her. I tucked my phone away, making a decision. "I'll meet her." "Want company?" I shook my head. Whatever she has to say, I need to hear it alone first. As we walked back toward the main building, the lights of the resort glowing warmly against the night sky, I felt a strange calm replacing the turmoil of earlier. I had reached the bottom of this emotional valley and found something unexpected. Not despair, but resolve. Victoria had thrown everything she had at me, and I was still standing. James might be wavering, but I wasn't. Whatever Eleanor Bennett had to share might be the key to understanding this family that had simultaneously embraced and rejected me, and the resort that had become the battleground for our conflict. For the first time since arriving at Sapphire Cove, I felt not like an outsider fighting for acceptance, but like someone discovering her own power. Victoria had created this war, but I would be the one to end it, on my terms, not hers. As we reached the main entrance, Olivia gave my arm a squeeze. No matter what happens with the resort or with James, you've already won something important, Maya. What's that? She smiled. Your freedom from Victoria's approval. Trust me, that's worth more than any oceanfront property. With those words echoing in my mind, I headed inside to face whatever came next. The emotional low point had passed, leaving behind a clarity I hadn't expected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new information, and perhaps a new strategy. But tonight I knew one thing for certain. I would no longer measure my worth by Victoria Harrison's standards. And that realization was the first step toward truly becoming a force the Harrisons would have to reckon with. The Harborview Cafe sat on a weathered pier overlooking the harbor, its blue clapboard exterior faded by decades of salt air. I arrived, early, choosing a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the water. The morning fog was just beginning to lift, revealing fishing boats heading out for the day's catch. A waitress poured me coffee, the rich aroma a welcome comfort after a nearly sleepless night. James had been asleep when I returned to our suite, or at least pretending to be. I had lain beside him, our bodies separated by mere inches that somehow felt like miles, wondering how we had arrived at this impasse. At precisely 8 a.m., a woman entered the cafe. She was in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the straight-backed posture of someone accustomed to maintaining appearances. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on me with immediate recognition. "Mrs. Chen Harrison," she said, extending her hand as she approached. "Eleanor Bennett. Thank you for meeting me." Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. This was a woman who didn't waste time on pretenses. "Call me Maya, please," I replied, gesturing to the seat across from me. "Olivia says you worked for Victoria." "For several years." Eleanor nodded, ordering coffee before continuing. 7 years as her personal assistant. I saw things, learned things, that the Harrison family has worked very hard to keep buried. About Sapphire Cove? About Victoria herself. Eleanor leaned forward. "Do you know how the Harrisons acquired the island originally?" I shook my head. James mentioned his great-grandfather built the resort, but he didn't elaborate. Alexander. "Harrison didn't build it, he took it." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "The island belonged to the Beaumont family. They had a small hotel here, started by Samuel Beaumont after the Civil War. During the Depression, the Beaumonts fell on hard times. Alexander offered to become a silent partner, investing enough to keep them afloat. Once he gained partial ownership, he systematically forced them out, eventually taking full control for a fraction of its value." I frowned. "That's unethical, but it was also nearly a century ago. How does this help me now?" Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. "Because history has a way of repeating itself in the Harrison family. Victoria didn't tell you why she's so obsessed with maintaining control of Sapphire Cove, did she? She talks about legacy and tradition. It's more than that." Eleanor reached into her bag, withdrawing a faded photograph. "This is Samuel Beaumont's granddaughter, Catherine." The image showed a young woman in 1940s attire, standing proudly on the very pier where we now sat. Her resemblance to Victoria was startling, the same aristocratic features, the same confident posture. Catherine Beaumont was Victoria's mother. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Victoria is a Beaumont?" Eleanor nodded. Her mother married Richard's father, joining the families that had once been bitter enemies. Victoria has spent her entire life trying to prove she's a true Harrison, more devoted to the family legacy than anyone with pure Harrison blood. Her obsession with Sapphire Cove isn't just about maintaining a family property, it's about burying her Beaumont heritage and the story of how the Harrisons stole this island. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria's fanatical devotion to Harrison traditions, her hostility toward outsiders, her determination to control the resort's future, all stemmed from her desperate need to belong, to prove herself more Harrison than the Harrisons themselves. "There's more," Eleanor continued, Victoria's control of the resort isn't as secure as she pretends. According to the original partnership agreement between the families, if the resort ever ceases to be profitable for 3 consecutive years, ownership reverts to the Beaumont heirs. My mind raced. The resort has been losing money. For the past 2 years, Eleanor confirmed. This would be the 3rd. Victoria has been manipulating the books, transferring funds from other Harrison holdings to make Sapphire Cove appear profitable on paper. But the truth is, the resort is failing under her management. How do you know all this? I asked, suddenly suspicious. Eleanor's smile held no warmth. Because I was the one who helped her hide the numbers until I developed a conscience. When I threatened to reveal what she was doing, she fired me and made sure I couldn't find work anywhere in New England. She slid a USB drive across the table. Everything's here. The original partnership agreement, the financial records I managed to copy before she fired me, documentation of the property's actual performance. It's 15 years old, but it establishes a pattern. I stared at the small device, understanding its explosive potential. Why give this to me? Why now? Because Victoria Harrison destroyed my life when I tried to do the right thing, Eleanor said quietly. And because the staff at Sapphire Cove deserve better than watching their livelihoods collapse under her mismanagement. As Eleanor left, I remained at the table, turning the USB drive over in my hands. If what she said was true, Victoria's position was far more precarious than anyone realized. Her vicious campaign against me wasn't just about maintaining control. It was about preventing the exposure of her family's true history and her own financial manipulations. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcos. Judge delayed injunction hearing. Until tomorrow. Victoria claiming new evidence. Need to talk ASAP. Another message followed immediately from Olivia. Mother's called another family meeting. They're voting on whether to pursue legal action against you personally. James is trying to stop it. The walls were closing in, but for the first time, I glimpsed a path forward, not through confrontation or capitulation, but through truth. Victoria had built her power on a foundation of carefully curated family mythology. What would happen if that foundation crumbled? As I walked back to the dock to catch the boat to Sapphire Cove, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar, main number, Mrs. Chen Harrison? A man's voice, elderly but strong. My name is Harold Beaumont. Eleanor Bennett suggested I call you. I believe we have matters of mutual interest to discuss regarding the future of what you call Sapphire Cove, and what my family once called Beaumont Isle. The morning fog had lifted completely now, revealing the island in the distance, its white buildings gleaming in the sunlight, its shores waiting to reveal secrets long buried beneath layers of Harrison history. Yes, Mr. Beaumont, I replied, a plan forming in my mind. I think we have a great deal to discuss. Change was coming to Sapphire Cove, and not even Victoria Harrison could stop the tide. Harold Beaumont was waiting for me at a small boathouse near the public marina. He was older than I had expected, well into his 80s, with snow-white hair and deeply tanned skin that spoke of a lifetime on the water. His weathered fishing boat, the Catherine B., rocked gently against the dock. Mrs. Chen Harrison. He nodded in greeting, his main accent thick but his eyes sharp as he assessed me. Eleanor says you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest with Victoria. It seems I have a talent for it, I replied, accepting his outstretched hand. Harold's grip was strong despite his age. Let's not talk here. Too many ears in a small town. We'll take my boat out. As we motored out of the harbor, Sapphire Cove became visible on the horizon. From this distance, it looked serene, picture perfect, a world apart from the turbulence happening within its walls. My grandfather built the first hotel on that island, Harold said, following my gaze. Started with just 5 rooms, built it, up to 30 before the Depression hit. The Harrisons didn't just take our business, they took our home. I'm sorry, I said, genuinely moved by the pain still evident in his voice decades later. I had no idea. Few do. Victoria's made sure of that. He cut the engine, letting us drift in a quiet cove sheltered from view of the island. Eleanor tells me you have proof of Victoria's financial manipulations. I nodded, retrieving the USB drive from my pocket. I haven't verified it yet, but if it's authentic, it shows that Victoria has been artificially propping up the resort's finances to prevent triggering the reversion clause in the original agreement. Harold's weathered face broke into a smile. That agreement has been the Beaumont family's white whale for generations. My father tried to enforce it in the 60s during another downturn. The Harrisons buried him in legal fees until he gave up. But if we have proof, I began. Proof helps, but Victoria has connections throughout the main judiciary. She'd find a way to delay, to challenge, to make the process so expensive we'd give up again. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, though there was no one else for miles. That's why I'm proposing something more direct. From beneath a bench, Harold withdrew a worn leather portfolio. Inside were documents so old the edges crumbled slightly as he carefully unfolded them. These are the original land surveys of the island, showing the property lines before the Harrisons consolidated ownership. His gnarled finger traced a boundary on the yellowed paper. This section here, the north point with the lighthouse, was never legally transferred to the Harrisons. A technical oversight in the deed that was never corrected. I studied the surveys, my pulse quickening. Are you saying part of the island still legally belongs to the Beaumonts? I'm saying that according to these records, the lighthouse and surrounding 5 acres have been in legal limbo for nearly 80 years. Not Harrison property, not officially Beaumont property either, but with a clear claim that my family could assert. The implications were staggering. The historic lighthouse was one of Sapphire Cove's most iconic features, featured in all their marketing materials. If the Beaumonts claimed ownership, I've consulted attorneys over the years, Harold continued. The claim is solid, but fighting the Harrisons alone would be financial suicide. That's where you come in. Me? Harold's eyes, faded blue but still penetrating, fixed on mine. You have resources, you have motivation, and most importantly, you have something I lack, a legitimate seat at the Harrison table through your marriage. He refolded the surveys with reverent care. I'm not getting any younger, Mrs. Chen Harrison. Before I die, I want to reclaim some small piece of what was stolen from my family. With your help, I believe we can do that. And in the process, break Victoria's stranglehold on Sapphire Cove, once and for all. As we motored back to the harbor, my mind raced with possibilities. This unexpected ally and his explosive revelation had changed everything. Victoria's greatest vulnerability wasn't the management agreement or even the financial irregularities. It was her family's original sin, the theft that had founded their precious legacy. Harold handed me the portfolio as we docked. Consider this a loan. Use it wisely. I will, I promised, understanding the trust he was placing in me. As his boat pulled away, my phone buzzed with a message from James. Where are you? The injunction hearing is moved up to 3 p.m. Victoria's lawyers say they have a breakthrough. Please come back. I clutched the portfolio to my chest, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. The breakthrough Victoria's lawyers claimed might be coming from their side, but the true game changer was now in my hands. For the first time since this battle began, I felt the momentum shifting. Victoria had thrown everything she had at me, but she could never have anticipated Harold Beaumont and the century-old secret that was about to upend her carefully constructed world. I arrived back at Sapphire Cove with barely enough time to change before the emergency hearing. The resort was abuzz with tension. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, and Harrison family members clustered in small groups throughout the lobby, conversations ceasing when I walked past. James was waiting in our suite, pacing anxiously. Where? Have you been? I've been trying to reach you all morning. I had a meeting in town, I replied, carefully placing Harold's portfolio in my laptop bag. What's happening with the hearing? Mother claims she has evidence that you knew about the resort's finances before the management deal. She's saying you deliberately withheld your connection to Marcos until after the agreement was signed. His eyes searched mine. Maya, please, tell me that's not true. I met his gaze steadily. It's not true. I met Marcos at the conference exactly as I told you. But James, there's something bigger happening here. Something your mother has kept hidden for generations. Before I could explain further, Olivia burst into the room. We need to go. Mother's lawyers are already at the courthouse and they're looking smug. As we drove to the mainland, I debated whether to reveal what I had learned. The information Harold had shared could change everything, but using it meant potentially driving an even deeper wedge between James and his family. I needed more time to consider the implications. The county courthouse was an imposing granite building overlooking the harbor. Victoria's luxury SUV was already parked in front, her driver standing at attention. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom held an audience of Harrison family members, resort staff, and curious locals drawn by the rumors swirling through town. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table, the picture of wounded dignity in a tailored navy suit. When she saw me enter with James, her lips tightened into a thin line. Beside her lead attorney arranged documents with practiced precision. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Gregory Whitman entered, a distinguished man in his 70s who, according to Eleanor, had been a lifelong friend of the Harrison family. As the proceedings began, Victoria's attorney presented their case with measured indignation. Your Honor, what appeared to be a standard business transaction has proven to be something far more troubling. Mrs. Chen Harrison deliberately concealed her connection to Sustainable Futures and used her position as a Harrison family member to access confidential information about the resort's operations. He produced an affidavit from a waiter who claimed to have overheard me discussing Sapphire Cove's finances with Marcos at the climate conference, months before the acquisition. This is absurd, Marcos whispered to me. I'd never even heard of Sapphire Cove before you mentioned it after the conference. Our attorney rose to object, pointing out the hearsay nature of the evidence, but Judge Whitman allowed it. The court will determine its relevance and weight, he said, though his sideways glance at Victoria suggested he had already decided. As the proceedings continued, I felt the balance shifting against us. Judge Whitman consistently ruled in Victoria's favor on procedural matters, and the local audience seemed swayed by the portrayal of me as an opportunistic outsider, taking advantage of a beloved community institution. During a brief recess, I stepped into the hallway for air, finding myself face to face with Victoria. You should save yourself the humiliation and withdraw now, she said, her voice low but triumphant. You'll never win in this town, Maya. These people have known the Harrisons for generations. Known the Harrisons or feared them, I countered. Tell me, Victoria, does anyone here know about the Beaumonts? The color drained from her face. What did you say? The Beaumonts, your mother's family. The original owners of the island before the Harrisons took it during the Depression. Victoria glanced around quickly, confirming we were alone. Where did you hear that name? I had an interesting conversation with Harold Beaumont this morning. He shared some fascinating documents about the island's ownership, particularly regarding the lighthouse property. Victoria's composure cracked, revealing something I had never seen in her before. Fear. Harold Beaumont is a bitter old man clinging to family myths. The survey maps don't look like myths to me, I replied calmly. Neither do the financial records showing how you've been manipulating the resort's books to prevent triggering the reversion clause. For a moment, Victoria looked genuinely shaken. Then, like a mask sliding back into place, her features hardened into cold determination. You have no idea what you're playing with, Maya. Some doors should remain closed for everyone's sake, including James's. Don't you think your son deserves to know the truth about his family legacy? Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. My son already carries the burden of the Harrison name. I've spent my life protecting him, protecting all of them, from mistakes of the past. I won't let you destroy that protection out of spite. This isn't about spite, I insisted. It's about truth. It's about the future of Sapphire Cove. The future? Victoria laughed bitterly. You talk about the future while digging up graves from a century ago. What do you hope to accomplish? Turning my son against me? Clearing the Beaumont's name after decades? What's your endgame, Maya? The question caught me off guard. What was my endgame? Revenge against Victoria? Validation of my place in the Harrison world? Or something more? A chance to transform Sapphire Cove into what it could be, unburdened by secrets and suppression. Before I could answer, the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. As I returned to my seat, I caught James watching me with a troubled expression. He had seen me talking with Victoria, but couldn't have heard our conversation. The uncertainty in his eyes reflected my own inner conflict. Judge Whitman cleared his throat, ready to continue the proceedings, but I suddenly stood, my decision made. Your Honor, before we continue, there's information that should be brought to the court's attention, information that fundamentally changes the context of this dispute. Victoria's attorney immediately objected, but I persisted. This case isn't simply about a management agreement. It's about the true ownership of Sapphire Cove, dating back to its acquisition from the Beaumont family in the 1930s. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Local residents exchanged glances, the name Beaumont obviously stirring recognition among the older generation. Your Honor, Victoria's attorney protested, this is clearly a delay tactic with no relevance to the matter at hand. Judge Whitman's gaze shifted between me and Victoria, whose rigid posture betrayed her tension. Mrs. Chen Harrison, these are serious allegations that extend well beyond the scope of today's hearing. They are directly relevant, Your Honor, I countered. Victoria Harrison's opposition to our management agreement stems not from business concerns, but from fear that our involvement would expose long-buried truths about how the Harrisons acquired Sapphire Cove. Victoria stood abruptly. This is outrageous! Your Honor, I request a brief recess to consult with my client. Judge Whitman nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the proceedings had taken. Court will recess for 15 minutes. As the judge left the bench, the courtroom erupted in whispers. James turned to me, bewilderment clear on his face. Maya, what are you doing? What is this about the Beaumonts? It's about your family's history, James. The real history, not the sanitized version Victoria has presented all these years. I took his hand. And it's about finding a way forward for Sapphire Cove that honors that history instead of burying it. Across the room, Victoria was engaged in intense conversation with her attorneys, her carefully maintained composure showing cracks. For the first time in our long conflict, she was on the defensive. The revelation had been dropped like a stone into still water, and now the ripples were spreading, through the courtroom, through the community, and through the carefully constructed narrative the Harrison family had maintained for generations. And in those ripples, I glimpsed the possibility of resolution I hadn't seen before, not through victory or defeat, but through truth and reconciliation. The 15-minute recess stretched to 30 as Victoria and her legal team sequestered themselves in a small conference room. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I huddled with Marcos, our attorney, and, to my surprise, James, who had chosen to stay by my side despite his obvious confusion. You need to tell me everything, James said, his voice low and urgent. What's this about the Beaumonts? What does this have to do with my mother? I hesitated, then made a decision. Your mother is half Beaumont. Her mother was Catherine Beaumont, granddaughter of the man who built the original hotel on the island. James stared at me. That's impossible. Mother always said her parents were both from Philadelphia society. It's true, I insisted, retrieving Harold's portfolio from my bag. Look at these documents, the original surveys, the incomplete property transfer for the lighthouse section, the partnership agreement with the reversion clause. As James examined the yellowed papers, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock. This can't be right. Mother would have told me. Would she? I asked gently. Victoria has spent her entire life burying her Beaumont heritage, proving herself more Harrison than the Harrisons themselves. She's been obsessed with preserving what she sees as her rightful legacy, even at the cost of the resort's financial health. I explained what Eleanor Bennett had revealed about the financial manipulations, about Victoria propping up the resort's books to prevent triggering the reversion clause. James listened in stunned silence, his world visibly realigning. Our attorney, Maya Chen, no relation, studied the documents with clinical interest. If these are authentic, they create significant complications for Victoria's case. The lighthouse property issue alone could tie up Sapphire Cove in litigation for years. That's not my goal, I said firmly. I don't want to destroy Sapphire Cove or the Harrison family. I want to save the resort and find a path forward that honors its full history. Noble sentiments, Margaret replied pragmatically, but we need a concrete strategy for this hearing. Judge Whitman is clearly predisposed toward Victoria, and these historical documents, while fascinating, don't directly address the injunction question. Marcos, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly straightened. What if we propose a settlement? One that addresses both the management agreement and the historical claims. What kind of settlement? James asked. A partnership, I suggested, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. Between Sustainable Futures, the Harrison family, and the Beaumont heirs. A true partnership that acknowledges the shared history and creates a sustainable future for the resort. James considered this. Mother would never agree to share control. She might, I countered, if the alternative is a public exposure of family secrets and a protracted legal battle that could damage the Harrison name far more than a carefully managed partnership. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. It's a solid approach. We can present it as a good faith effort to resolve all outstanding issues and preserve the resort's legacy, the complete legacy. As we discussed the details, Olivia approached, her expression troubled. You need to see this, she said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a breaking news alert from the local paper. Historic dispute reignited. Beaumont claim on Sapphire. Cove threatens Harrison legacy. How did they get this so quickly? I asked, stunned by the headline. Small town, Olivia replied grimly. Someone in the courtroom must have called it in. The point is, the story's out. The Beaumont connection is public knowledge now. James took the phone, scrolling through the article. They've quoted Harold Beaumont. He says he's gratified that the truth is finally emerging after nearly a century of silence. The courthouse doors opened, and an elderly man entered, leaning on a carved wooden cane. Harold Beaumont had decided to join the proceedings. I figured it was time to show my face, he said as he approached our group. Victoria Harrison has hidden from the truth long enough. James studied Harold's features, the same blue eyes as Victoria, the same proud bearing despite his age. You're my mother's cousin? Second cousin, Harold corrected. Our grandmothers were sisters. Victoria knows who I am, though she's pretended otherwise her entire life. The bailiff appeared, announcing that court would reconvene in 5 minutes. As we prepared to return to the courtroom, I pulled James aside. Are you okay? I know this is a lot to process. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress. I'm trying to reconcile the mother I know with this. This person who would deny her own heritage, manipulate financial records, and go to such lengths to maintain a fiction. She thought she was protecting you, I said softly. Protecting the Harrison name and all it represents. By building it. On lies? James shook his head. I always knew Mother was obsessed with status and tradition, but this is different. A commotion at the end of the hallway drew our attention. Victoria had emerged from the conference room, her face ashen as she caught sight of Harold Beaumont. For a moment, she froze, staring at the elderly man who represented everything she had tried to erase. Then, with visible effort, she straightened her shoulders and marched toward the courtroom, refusing to acknowledge Harold's presence. Her attorneys followed, their expressions grim. She's going to fight, James murmured. Even now, she's going to fight rather than acknowledge the truth. I squeezed his hand. Then we need to give her a reason to stop fighting, a way to preserve her dignity while still moving forward honestly. As we filed back into the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of determination and empathy. Victoria. Harrison had built her entire identity around denying part of herself, around proving her worth through rigid adherence to Harrison traditions. In her own way, she had been fighting for acceptance just as I had, willing to sacrifice authenticity for belonging. Judge Whitman called the court to order, his expression suggesting he had also heard the breaking news. Before we continue, I understand both parties may wish to address new information that has come to light. Victoria's attorney rose. Your Honor, we maintain that these historical claims are irrelevant to the injunction question and request that we return to the matter at hand. They're not irrelevant, I said, standing before our attorney could respond. They're at the heart of this dispute. Victoria's opposition to our management agreement isn't about business concerns. It's about maintaining control over a narrative she's constructed, a narrative that erases half of Sapphire Cove's true history. Victoria's eyes, locked with mine, a silent battle of wills across the courtroom, but beneath her anger, I glimpsed something else. Exhaustion. The burden of maintaining her carefully constructed reality was finally becoming too heavy to bear. Your Honor, I continued, we would like to propose a settlement that addresses both the management agreement and these historical claims. A partnership that honors the complete legacy of Sapphire Cove, both Harrison and Beaumont. Judge Whitman raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Harrison, would you be willing to entertain such a proposal? All eyes turned to Victoria. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for her response. In that moment of suspended animation, the weight of decades of secrets and suppression hung in the balance. Victoria Harrison stood at a crossroads, forced to choose between continuing her lifelong battle against the truth or finally embracing the complex reality of her heritage. And in her choice lay the future of Sapphire Cove, and perhaps the future of my relationship with the family I had married into. The courtroom remained silent as Victoria stood, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades. Your Honor, I request a brief adjournment to discuss this proposal with my attorneys. Judge Whitman nodded, clearly relieved to delay further public airing of Harrison family secrets. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9. I strongly encourage both parties to use this time to reach an amicable resolution. As the judge departed, Victoria's gaze swept across the courtroom, landing on Harold Beaumont. For a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the shadow of a shared history. Then she turned sharply and exited through a side door, her legal team hurrying after her. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, drawn by the breaking story. James took my arm, guiding me past them toward our waiting car. We need to talk to my mother, he said firmly. Not tomorrow, not after she's had time to retrench. Now. Are you sure? She might not be receptive. I'm sure. His jaw was set with determination I'd rarely seen. This ends today, one way or another. Back at Sapphire Cove, we found the main building in turmoil. Staff members whispered in corners while Harrison family members argued in hushed clusters. The story had spread through the resort like wildfire, igniting generations of suppressed rumors. Victoria had retreated to her private office in the East Wing, a sanctuary few were permitted to enter. When James knocked, there was no response. He tried the handle and found it unlocked. The office was quintessentially Victoria, elegant, immaculate, with every item precisely placed. Victoria herself stood by the window overlooking the ocean, her back to the door. She didn't turn as we entered. "I suppose you've come to gloat," she said, her voice brittle. "No," I replied softly. "We've come to talk. Really talk, perhaps, for the first time." James stepped forward. "Mother, why didn't you tell me about the Beaumonts? About who you really are?" Victoria finally turned, her composure cracking to reveal a vulnerability I'd never witnessed. "Who I really am. I am Victoria Harrison. I have spent my entire life being Victoria Harrison." "And denying Catherine Beaumont's daughter," James countered. Victoria flinched as if struck. "You don't understand. You couldn't possibly understand what it was like, watching my mother struggle with the shame of being part of a family that lost everything, that was pushed out of their own home. The whispers, the pity, the constant reminder that I wasn't. Quite a true Harrison. So you buried that part of yourself," I said. "And with it, the truth about Sapphire Cove." "I protected our legacy," Victoria's voice rose. "I preserved what generations of Harrisons built." "But at what cost?" I asked, moving to stand beside James. "The resort is failing, Victoria. Your determination to maintain traditions is driving it into the ground." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing the exhausted woman beneath. "What would you have me do? Surrender the island my husband's family built to strangers? To you?" "Not surrender," I said. "Partner. Create something new that honors both the Harrison and Beaumont legacies." James took his mother's hand, an intimacy I'd rarely seen between them. "Mother, Maya and I have discussed it. We want to propose a new vision for Sapphire Cove, one where the Harrison family maintains ownership, but with acknowledgement of the Beaumont contribution and a management structure that brings the resort into the future." Victoria wavered visibly, caught between decades of rigid control and the reality of her crumbling position. "The world already knows," I said gently. "The story is out there. We can't change that. But we can control what happens next." Victoria sank into her chair, suddenly, looking her age. "What exactly are you proposing?" As James outlined our plan, a partnership between the Harrison family, Sustainable Futures, and a trust representing the Beaumont heirs, with a museum space dedicated to the island's complete history, I watched Victoria's expression shift from resistance to reluctant consideration. "The alternative," I added carefully, "is years of litigation, public scrutiny of private family matters, and the continued financial decline of Sapphire Cove." Victoria's gaze moved to the photographs lining her office walls, generations of Harrisons standing proudly on the island, her own image prominent among them. But nowhere was there a picture of Catherine Beaumont, the mother whose heritage Victoria had denied for so long. "I need time to think," she said finally. As we left her office, I realized we had witnessed something few had ever seen: Victoria Harrison considering compromise. It wasn't surrender, not yet, but it was a crack in the fortress she had maintained for decades. In the hallway, James pulled me close. "Whatever happens next," he whispered, "we face it together. No more choosing sides." For the first time since arriving at Sapphire Cove, I felt not like an adversary or an outsider, but like a partner in creating a new future for this troubled paradise. A future built not on exclusion and secrets, but on honesty and inclusion. The bold action had been taken, the truth had been spoken. Now we would see if Victoria Harrison could finally make peace with her complete identity and allow Sapphire Cove to do the same. Morning arrived with an ominous stillness. Overnight, the story had exploded beyond the local paper to regional news outlets. Harrison-Beaumont feud resurfaces, read one headline. Luxury resort's secret history revealed, proclaimed another. Reporters had gathered at the dock, awaiting boats to the island. James and I were having coffee on our suite's balcony when Olivia burst in, her expression alarmed. "Mother's gone," she said breathlessly. "She left the island before dawn. Her suite is empty. Clothes gone, jewelry case missing." James stood abruptly. "Gone where?" "No one knows, but that's not all." Olivia handed him her tablet. "She sent this to all Harrison family members 20 minutes ago." The email was brief but devastating. "Family Maya Chen has orchestrated a deliberate attack on our legacy using manipulation and half-truths to divide us. Rather than participate in this charade, I am taking steps to protect what generations of Harrisons have built. I expect your loyalty in the difficult days ahead. Victoria Harrison." "What does she mean by taking steps?" I asked, a sense of foreboding washing over me. My phone rang. Marcos, his voice tight with urgency. "Victoria's lawyers just filed emergency motions in 3 different courts. They're claiming fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and unauthorized use of Harrison intellectual property. They've also contacted all our major investors with allegations that could trigger withdrawal clauses." "She's scorching the earth," James murmured, disbelief coloring his voice. "There's more," Marcos continued. "They've initiated proceedings to challenge your marriage settlement agreement, claiming James wasn't of sound mind when he signed it." I felt the blood drain from my face. "She's not just attacking the business deal. She's attacking our marriage." James took my hand, his grip tight. "She's gone too far." Within the hour, the full extent of Victoria's counterattack became clear. She had activated every connection, leveraged every resource, and pulled every string in her considerable network. The Harrison family attorneys had filed injunctions not just against Sustainable Futures, but against me personally. Credit agencies had received anonymous tips questioning my financial history. Even my former clients were being contacted with insinuations about my business ethics. Victoria Harrison hadn't just retreated. She had regrouped and launched a comprehensive campaign to destroy me professionally and personally. "She's desperate," Olivia said as we gathered in the resort's conference room with the legal team. "This is what Mother does when she feels cornered. She doesn't just defend, she obliterates." Richard Harrison joined us, looking haggard. "I've tried calling her. She's not answering. I've never seen her like this. Not even during the worst business crises we've faced." Our attorney, Margaret, assessed the situation with professional detachment. "These are scorched earth tactics. Legally, they're thin, but fighting them will be expensive and time-consuming. That's exactly what she wants, to drain your resources and resolve." "What about Harold Beaumont's claims?" I asked. "The lighthouse property, the reversion clause?" "Still valid, but Victoria is creating so much noise that those issues are temporarily overshadowed." Classic misdirection. As our team strategized, counter-responses. I stepped away to the window, watching waves crash against the rocky shoreline. Victoria's attack was calculated to provoke an equally aggressive response, to drag this fight into a prolonged legal war that would ultimately damage everyone involved, including Sapphire Cove itself. James joined me, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry. I never imagined she would go this far." "I did," I admitted. "Not the specifics, but the intensity. Victoria sees this as an existential threat, not just to her control of Sapphire Cove, but to her entire identity. So what do we do? Counter each attack? That's exactly what she wants. A war of attrition where everyone loses except the lawyers." I turned from the window, a different approach crystallizing in my mind. "No, we don't counterattack at all." "What?" Victoria expects us to fight fire with fire. She's prepared for that battle and has positioned herself as the defender of Harrison tradition against outside usurpers. I moved back to the conference table. Instead, we changed the narrative completely. How? Marcos asked. By publicly embracing the full history of Sapphire Cove, both Harrison and Beaumont. By proposing exactly what we discussed with Victoria yesterday, but doing it publicly, transparently, and with Harold Beaumont's full participation. James caught on immediately. A partnership honoring both families' contributions, with a plan to revitalize the resort while preserving its heritage. Exactly. Victoria has positioned herself as the guardian of Harrison legacy. We position ourselves as guardians of the complete legacy, the truth she's been running from her entire life. Richard nodded slowly. That might actually work. Victoria's always been terrified of public opinion turning against the Harrison name. We need to move quickly, Margaret advised, before her legal maneuvers gain traction. Within the hour, we had drafted a public statement and partnership proposal, with Harold Beaumont's enthusiastic approval. Rather than hiding from the press, gathered at the dock, we invited them to the resort for a formal announcement. By mid-afternoon, the grand lobby of Sapphire Cove was filled with journalists, local residents, and curious staff members. Harold Beaumont stood proudly at the podium, his weathered face solemn as he described his family's original vision for the island. James followed, acknowledging both the Harrison achievements and the historical injustice that had tainted the resort's beginnings. When my turn came, I focused not on Victoria's attacks, but on the future. A sustainable, inclusive vision for Sapphire Cove that honored its complex past while embracing innovation. The Beaumont-Harrison partnership would establish a trust to manage the resort, with representatives from both families, sustainable futures, and the local community. As cameras flashed and reporters scribbled notes, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, from scandal and conflict to possibility and reconciliation. Victoria had expected us to respond with anger and accusation. Instead, we had offered healing and inclusion. The press conference was still ongoing when Richard's phone buzzed with a message. He checked it, then wordlessly passed it to James, whose eyes widened. "It's from Mother," he whispered to me. "She's watching the live stream." The message was brief. "Meet me at the lighthouse, alone, both of you." As the press conference concluded, James and I exchanged glances. Victoria's counterattack had failed to provoke the bitter legal battle she had anticipated. Now she was calling us to the one place on the island most symbolic of the hidden truth. The lighthouse that had never legally belonged to the Harrisons. "Do we go?" James asked. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. This was never about winning a fight. It was about finding a resolution. As we walked the winding path to the northern point where the lighthouse stood, I felt a curious sense of calm. Whatever awaited us there, Victoria's surrender or her final stand, we would face it together. The white lighthouse rose against the blue sky, its beacon having guided sailors safely to shore for over a century. And at its base stood Victoria Harrison, alone and waiting, a solitary figure at the crossroads of past and future, secrets and truth, conflict and resolution. The lighthouse stood sentinel against the darkening sky, its weathered white exterior gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Victoria waited at its base, her normally perfect appearance showing signs of strain, hair slightly disheveled by the coastal wind, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. As we approached, I noticed she clutched a worn leather portfolio similar to Harold's. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of defiance and something I'd never seen in her before, uncertainty. "I watched your press conference," she said without preamble. "Quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance, Mother," James replied. "It was the truth." Victoria's gaze shifted to the lighthouse behind her. "Do you know why I asked you to meet me here, of all places?" "Because it's the property with disputed ownership," I suggested. She shook her head. Because this is where my mother would bring me as a child, before she married into the Harrison family, before she was forced to hide her Beaumont heritage. Her voice softened with an unfamiliar vulnerability. She would tell me stories about her grandfather who built the first hotel, about how the lighthouse saved countless lives during the Great Storm of 1901. James moved closer. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Because I was protecting you. Victoria's composure cracked. Do you have any idea what it was like? Being half Beaumont in a family that had systematically destroyed the Beaumonts? I watched my mother slowly fade away, crushed under the weight of Harrison expectations, always reminded that she married up, that she should be grateful. Victoria opened the portfolio, withdrawing a faded photograph, a young woman with Victoria's eyes standing proudly at the lighthouse door. This was my mother, before she became Catherine Harrison and learned to hide who she really was. I swore I would never suffer as she did. I would be more Harrison than any Harrison by blood. So you erased the Beaumonts completely, I said quietly. Including the part of yourself that came from them. I did what was necessary to survive, to thrive. Victoria's eyes flashed. And I built Sapphire Cove into what it is today through sheer force of will. You also drove it to the brink of financial ruin, James countered gently. Mother, the resort is failing under the weight of tradition without innovation. Maya's plan, our plan, could save it. By exposing everything I've spent a lifetime burying. Victoria laughed bitterly. By making me admit that I'm descended from the very people the Harrisons ruined? No, I said, stepping forward. By honoring the complete legacy of this place. Harrison and Beaumont. By acknowledging that Sapphire Cove was born from both families, and its future should include both traditions. Victoria studied me, her expression calculating. And you expect me to simply accept this public humiliation? To stand aside while you rewrite the history I've carefully maintained? It's not humiliation to acknowledge the truth, James said. It's strength, the kind of strength you taught me to value. For a moment, Victoria seemed to waver, decades of rigid control battling against exhaustion and the undeniable reality of her situation. Then her spine straightened, her chin lifted in that familiar gesture of Harrison pride. I've spent 65 years being Victoria Harrison. I won't apologize for protecting my family's legacy, for maintaining standards in a world increasingly content with mediocrity. No one is asking you to apologize, I replied. We're asking you to help shape Sapphire Cove's future, a future that honors both sides of your heritage. By partnering with you? Victoria's tone was skeptical. The woman who orchestrated this, take over behind my back? Yes, I met her gaze directly. Because despite everything, we both love this place. We both want to see it thrive. And we're both outsiders who married into the Harrison name. The difference is, I never tried to erase who I was to prove I belonged. Victoria flinched as if struck. For several moments she said nothing, her gaze moving from the lighthouse to the resort buildings visible in the distance, then finally to James. And you? Where do you stand in all this? James took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. With Maya, with the future of Sapphire Cove, but also with you, Mother, if you're willing to move forward honestly. Victoria closed the portfolio containing her mother's photograph, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Harold Beaumont told you about the lighthouse property, I assume? I nodded. And about the reversion clause in the original agreement. Then you know you have legal leverage, Victoria acknowledged, even without public sentiment turning against the Harrison name. This isn't about leverage, I insisted. It's about finding a solution that works for everyone, including you. Victoria turned toward the lighthouse, silent for several long moments. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weariness that belied her rigid posture. For 65 years, I've defined myself by what I wasn't. Not a Beaumont, not an outsider, not someone who needed to prove her worth. She faced us again, her expression resolute. I don't know how to be anything else. You don't have to stop being Victoria Harrison, James said gently. You just have to allow room for Catherine Beaumont's daughter as well. The wind picked up, whipping around the lighthouse with a mournful whistle. Victoria stood framed against the structure, caught between the past she had maintained and the future rushing toward her. In that moment, she seemed simultaneously formidable and fragile, a woman who had spent decades building walls that were now crumbling despite her best efforts. The partnership proposal, she said finally. I want to review the details personally. No lawyers, no intermediaries, just the three of us. James and I exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't surrender, but it was a significant concession from a woman who had launched a comprehensive legal attack just hours earlier. Of course, I agreed. We can discuss modifications that address your concerns. I'm not promising anything, Victoria cautioned, but I'll listen. As we walked back toward the main building together, Victoria maintained a careful distance, her bearing still proud, her defenses not fully lowered. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in our long conflict, we were walking the same path, not as adversaries, but as three people bound by a shared concern for Sapphire Cove's future. The final confrontation had not ended in decisive victory or defeat, but in the first tentative steps toward a new understanding. Victoria Harrison, proud, formidable Victoria, had not surrendered her position entirely, but she had opened a door that had remained firmly closed for decades. And as the lighthouse beam began its nightly vigil behind us, illuminating the path forward through darkness, I realized that perhaps this was the most anyone could hope for, not conquest, but conversation. Not triumph, but truth. The war for Sapphire Cove wasn't over, but for the first time since it began, peace seemed possible. 1 year later, I stood on the deck of the newly renovated main building at Sapphire Cove, watching guests arrive for the grand reopening celebration. The resort had been closed for 6 months of intensive renovations, not just updating facilities, but reimagining the property as a showcase for sustainable luxury hospitality. Solar panels now gleamed discreetly on historic rooftops. The gardens featured native plants that required minimal watering. The restaurant served locally sourced cuisine from Maine farmers and fishermen. Every aspect of the resort balanced tradition with innovation, history with progress, and at the entrance, a new sign welcomed visitors. Sapphire Cove Resort, established 1879 by the Beaumont and Harrison families. Quite a transformation, James remarked, joining me at the railing. In more ways than one, I agreed. The partnership agreement we had eventually reached was not exactly what any of us had initially wanted, but it served all our interests. The Harrison family maintained ownership of the property, with a trust, established to protect the lighthouse area as a historical landmark. Sustainable Futures managed day-to-day operations and implemented the environmental initiatives, and a portion of profits went to a foundation supporting local conservation efforts, named in honor of Catherine Beaumont Harrison. Victoria had negotiated hard on every detail, refusing to cede control easily. But ultimately, she had recognized that adaptation was necessary for survival, both for Sapphire Cove and for her relationship with her son. Speaking of Victoria, she emerged from the main entrance below us, immaculately dressed as always. But something about her had changed. The rigid perfection remained, but it no longer seemed driven by desperate insecurity. She had found a new role as the resort's historian, channeling her obsession with legacy into documenting and preserving the complete story of Sapphire Cove, Beaumont beginnings, Harrison development, and now Chen Harrison innovation. I never thought I'd see her giving tours of the Beaumont exhibit, James mused. watching his mother greet arriving guests. "People can surprise you," I replied, thinking of how far we had all come. The sound of a ship's horn drew our attention to the harbor, where Harold Beaumont's fishing boat approached, now refurbished and serving as a shuttle for guests wanting an authentic Maine maritime experience. Harold himself stood at the helm, his weathered face beaming with pride. As the celebration began, I found myself momentarily alone with Victoria near the lighthouse, now restored to its original glory. "You've changed Sapphire Cove," she acknowledged, her tone carefully neutral. "We all have," I corrected gently. "It's not the same place it was a year ago." Victoria nodded, her gaze resting on the horizon where sea met sky. "My mother would have approved, I think. She always said the lighthouse was the heart of the island, the part that guided people safely home. It wasn't quite an apology for the years of exclusion, for the attempts to drive me away. But from Victoria Harrison, it was as close as I would ever get. And somehow, it was enough." As we walked back to join the others, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. What had begun as a battle for acceptance had transformed into something far more meaningful, a genuine contribution to a legacy worth preserving and extending. I was no longer an outsider seeking admission to Victoria's exclusive world. I had helped create a new world at Sapphire Cove, one where exclusivity gave way to inclusion, where tradition and innovation strengthened rather than opposed each other. And in that transformation of Sapphire Cove, I had finally found what I had been seeking all along, not Victoria's approval, but my own place in the continuing story of this remarkable island paradise. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.